programs to the public. Just a little self-promotion here. We have our items on the back table that you can come over to purchase tonight if you see something you need. Make great Christmas presents. And we look forward to seeing you over at the museum. We will be there from 10 to 2, the first and third Saturdays of November, and every Saturday before Christmas through December. So we'd be glad to have you come over and stop in, take a look. And like I said, there's some great Christmas ideas over there for you. And tonight we're very glad to welcome Tom Rolfe. He is the town historian in the town of Leicester. And he has a program on the railroad for us, and everybody has been so excited to hear about this, so I'm not going to take up any more time, and I'm going to let Tom get started. Thank you.
I got to lead off, first of all, with a couple announcements, I guess. First of all, I appreciate it if everybody, kept your cell phone turned down, turned off, so you don't annoy everybody else. Second of all, I'm going to have to do this from sitting down. I can't stand up or get out there because of some problems I'm having. I apologize. I was supposed to do this program back in March for you guys in Dansville, and I've had quite a year with a number of serious health issues, so that didn't happen, and we're still trying to work through those. And fortunately, I was able to reschedule it and come back tonight. So, anyways, just to give you a little quick background, I am not what you call a railroad buff. I was never fascinated with trains. My interest in trains came from the fact that I spent most of my life surrounded by them. My father worked for the railroad all his career life. And at one point, the first half of the decade of the 1980s, I worked for Amtrak down in Washington, D.C. at Union Station. So that's the extent of my railroad fascination, I guess you call it. But anyhow, they're a very important part of our country and history and of our county here. And I do enjoy them. One of the best things about living in Leicester for the past 25 years I've been there is the fact that we still have daily trains come right down through the middle of town every day, and it's nice to still be around that familiar and comfortable sound. Let me just bump this screen up so we can all see it better. Hit some lights, please. It'll turn out quite a bit sharper. And of course, the DL&W Railroad of Livingston County. It wasn't the first railroad in the county, but it was probably the most significant. It seconded the entire county, where most of the other railroad lines only cut little pieces and corners. But, of course, the railroad, of course, you know probably more about it than I do, run from Buffalo right on down and hit Livingston County right here, and stations at Linwood, Greggsville, Leicester, Mount Morris, Groveland, and Dansville, and then out of the county again, and down to New York City. It was initially, the railroad was built only in the 1860s, 1880s era as a northeast Pennsylvania line to haul coal out of the Pennsylvania mines, in particular up to the New York City area, and then branched out into southern New York State because of increased profits and demand for coal. And eventually it got all the way across New York State and picked up a passenger line branch as well. So we'll start on the western side of Livingston County and work our way on down through and end up, coming down through
It got moved into
Danville.
Fowlerville.
This is the first
It's still
station,
there. It's still there, but it's a
the railroad would
residence.
encounter in Livingston County. It was Linwood, the town of York, of course. This picture is late 1800s, and as you can see, they were basically small stations in the early years, and all pretty much the same. Platform, of course, for loading freight, and the train master's office, and the railroad signals, you know, for control of tracks and such. But as you can imagine, most of the freight at that time was, you know, general merchandise, hardware, farming equipment, things of that nature. And surprisingly, a lot of these stations in Livingston County still survive. This one in Linwood, of course, when the railroad shut down in about 1960, it was sold off by the railroad companies and ended up in private hands. And a lot of them became private houses or storage facilities or such.
That was
As you can see, that one was converted to a house. You can,
That's it. That's the one
if
right
you
there.
look close, you can, it had porches added on to it and around it and additions.
a restaurant.
But hidden in all of that structure is still the original railroad station. As I said, this was just some early photographs. You can, well, you probably can't, it's not very clear even in this picture, but the freight cars have DL and W on them, and this is still up in the Greggsville area. So a lot of the, as I said, a lot of the, this railing here, it's a fancy railing that went around the depot there. So now that that's out of the picture, but anyways, you can tell, as we said, a lot of the initial railroad traffic was freight. The Greggsville station, here again, same basic idea, routine, the passengers on one side and the freight station on the opposite side. Greggsville was important because of the salt mines at that time. A lot of the salt was shipped out of Greggsville. They had a connection there with the what became the Genesee Wyoming
That was
Railroad.
also a house
And of
now.
course, from there it went to
And it's
all
right up
points
the road
across the
from me.
country.
They moved it all the way up
And
my
of course, at this time, 1900 to 1930 in
On your
Cuylerville,
road?
there was also the Sterling Salt Mine
You
that
noticed it.
operated
You
in
wrote it's way back
Cuylerville,
in.
and they
Okay.
built a little spur line up to Greggsville, and they also, the salt mine, Sterling Salt Mine, a lot of their product was shipped by the Pennsylvania Railroad that came down through Cuylerville, but a lot of the bag salt and that type of product went by the spur line to Greggsville and was shipped out from there on the DL and W. This is just another shot of the Greggsville station. As the railroad progressed and became more profitable, as I said, they added on passenger cars and then eventually the individual passenger trains, and they started to expand and enlarge stations, and in some cases, tore them down and built newer stations. This was the case in Greggsville. They took in, as you can tell, there's quite a difference between the previous station and this one. This guy, kid, I guess he's leaning on the signal tower here, of course, and little outbuildings and such. I can only imagine what they're for. But the stations of York are still, there's a few of them left around, and they're nice to go in search of. One of them even became a restaurant at one time. Like I said, Greggsville, of course, in its later years, back in the 1970s. Pretty much abandoned, not used, but still a nice historic building. Now, as you came out of York and entered into the town of Leicester, you'd come around this big curve here, and this is just coming into town. And that, of course, is taken from the rooftop, so the top of the telephone poles are on the bottom of the picture. But anyways, once you got into Leicester, things got a little bit more busy for the railroads. This is a map of the village here, and as you can tell, right up here is the big bend into town, and the water tank up here, and then they went into multi-tracks. And because they had in Leicester, that's the railroad company storage, they had a lot of storage buildings, big hardware at that time, turn of the century, and down here at the Leicester station was all big feed mills and grain mills and coal storage, which we'll get to in a minute here. But as you can see, it cuts right through Main Street. The tracks are still there, still in use, and not all of them. They're down to just one track now. But anyways, the railroads went right through the heart of the village. They had quite a time when they built the railroad into Leicester in the tracks were laid about 1883 at that point. They had quite a time, the surveyors did, in laying the tracks and coming through the village. A lot of people, of course, didn't like the fact that the railroad were going to, bisect their land and property and create all kinds of problems for them. There's even a newspaper story. There was one man that offered the surveyors $1 if he would switch the track route to a different location there. He tried to bribe them to keep his property intact. Apparently it didn't work. They didn't allow it. But anyways, this is a unique picture of the first train once the tracks were completed down through to get to Leicester. I believe this is one of the work trains. When they did complete to Leicester that day, of course the train crews were building down from the York area, and every mile they got closer, everybody got more and more excited until they got right into the heart of town. And at that point, the work stopped. They took in, the whole town turned out, had a huge party of celebration because they finally had a railroad connection, and laid out a big feast for all the workers, and they had borrowed an old cannon from the town of Mount Morris, and had cannon salutes, and a number of bands from around the county came, and lots of music and sports and games, and it was the biggest carnival Leicester's ever had was when they got the railroad to come through. This shot is Main Street yet. This goes up to Perry, and this is the St. James Hotel. We'll get to that here in a second. And of course, the other side of Main Street is now the town hall and the post office and such. But it's unusual to get a picture of the first train in any town these days. Of course, at that time it was a big deal. They were freight cars at that time, of course. So the young guys, for a thrill, it was a big deal to climb on top of the cars and take a ride to wherever the next trip would take them, be it the next town over or what have you. It's not, as you can see, you just climb up there and sit on and hang on. It's not the safest thing to do, and probably not the smartest. But at that time, when trains were traveling 25, 30 miles an hour at top speeds, that was quite a thrill, I would imagine. I can't say it'd be anything I would do, but they enjoyed it apparently. One of the benefits, of course, with any town having a railroad is all the ability to make connections across the country and to branch out. Now, the main thing about the DL&W for us is the fact that it connected our little town of Leicester, or our little county of Livingston, with the entire world, basically, because now within an hour's, or within a half a day space of time, you could make the entire railroad trip from New York City to Buffalo. And of course, once you got to New York City, you had the entire Atlantic Europe at your disposal, and once you got to Buffalo, you had the entire western lands and jewel of the western country and Chicago and the Great Lakes to take you anywhere to get anything from any place in the world. One thing a person of Leicester did was he would have shipped in from the west carloads of horses, and he would have horse auctions on Main Street every year, and always a big deal. You look at the old newspapers, they're always advertising the upcoming horse auctions, so they pulled in a lot of people to town. This, of course, the section was turned into, us older people remember Christiano's Hardware there. And it's always neat, these old pictures, to see these old advertising signs. This is for the Welch Brothers store there in Leicester, which is long gone and such. But that's Main Street, Leicester, about 1915. Now, one of the bad things about having a railroad in the middle of town happened to Leicester in Sunday afternoon in June. There was a funeral at the cemetery for one of the prominent citizens, and it was a hot, sticky, muggy day in June, and most of the men and most of the townspeople were up the street a couple miles to the cemetery at this funeral, and one of the locomotives blew out some embers which landed on a nearby roof, and before anybody could realize what was going to happen and what was taking place, one building after another took fire. And by the time they got back down from the cemetery, it was totally out of control. That hotel, that's that St. James Hotel we just looked at, going up in flames. This is Main Street, of course, and the business section of Leicester is pretty well burned down. And it was the biggest fire. This lower picture is the day after. You can see what's left. That was the biggest fire in the area up until that point. It wiped out about 30 houses and businesses and barns, and damage was over $100,000. Fortunately, nobody was killed, but the property loss was substantial. This is still Main Street, and this track, of course, goes up to York. The water tower back here, the foundation of that is still there. But anyways, it took a little bit of time for Leicester to rebuild and recover from that. But of course, we bounced back stronger than ever. This is taken from Main Street, Leicester, at the tracks, and this is looking towards Mount Morris now. And this is one of the big, this is the Biter Company warehouse, one of the huge railroad warehouses. As you can see, they have a number of sidings now. And back here is the old station, the original station. So it didn't take long to recover from the fire, and train traffic, of course, it didn't slow them down a bit. They were running constantly. It's another view from the rooftop across the street. DL&W freight cars, the warehouse here. You can see a number of farmers lining up here with their wagons for grain deposits and stock pens back here. And these pictures don't do justice. It was a huge building in its day. This back here was a private house. This was the house of a doctor who lived near the tracks, and when the train came through, they needed a station at the time, so they made arrangements with the doctor to take over his house and turned it into the Leicester train station. There's the doctor's house at that time. And you can see they got the train switches here, the carts for shipping and freight. And these signs here are difficult to read under this type of condition, but they talk about the Lester train station in small town America. A little better picture of the same building, shows more detail there. These crates down here are ready to be shipped out, fruit, apples, that type of thing. In those days, the county had thousands and thousands of fruit trees, apples, peaches, pears, anything you can think of. It was big business to ship them off to New York City and other places. This is still Main Street, Leicester, and this track runs to York. And this was the old brick building that was a railroad storage house. And the neat thing about this picture is the fact that over here is the gatekeeper's house. Quite often you see, you know, these small railroad buildings of, you know, use that didn't get a lot of attention. But of course, there's the railroad crossing signs and the gatekeeper's house and signals. And the big brick storehouse was an impressive building. The railroad, of course, owned it and decided they didn't need it anymore and tore it down, unfortunately. This is across from the brick building. This is another of the warehouses in Leicester. This building is still there, actually. And as you can see, it's got the chutes on the side for the grain to fill the railroad cars. And it became part of the Cristiano property. And like I said, in 1915, the railroad was doing quite a prosperous business by 1900, and they were making so much money that they shifted more of their attention over to passenger service, to put on more passenger trains. And so at that point, they decided to upgrade and improve a lot of their rail and stations. Leicester was one of these places that got a new station, and they had a special work train that would come in and park right there in town on a siding, and a special crew that stayed on these trains, and all their material was brought into them, and they took and constructed the station one right after the other, right on down the line, right from Buffalo to New York. If you see a lot of pictures of the DL&W stations, it's amazing the almost a cookie cutter pattern. A lot of them are almost duplicate in construction. This was built, the manager of the crew was a man by the name of Reynolds from Pennsylvania, and he took and at the time, there's a couple of different stories. Some of them have to do with a certain woman, and some of them have to do with a good business sense. But he decided Leicester was a pretty good place to stay, so he relocated his family and everything, and established his home in Leicester. And the Leicester became his. He bought the lumber yard there in town. And his family still lives in Leicester. Reynolds, he lives in town. His brother lives in Mount Morris. Down here in the corner is the train station train master and the mayor of the town. And the Leicester station is still completely intact. As a matter of fact, you go right down Main Street, you'll hit the railroad tracks, and you look off to the park, and it's right there. It's so well taken care of that nearly 10 years ago, I got it put on the National Register of Historic Places with almost no effort at all. I mean, the people that evaluated it and looked at it just couldn't believe how near perfect it still was. So we're pretty proud of that. Our depot is not only on the National Register, but the people that now own it there have taken and spruced it up, if you will, a bit, and they've opened a small coffee and arts craft store shop there called Gatherings at the Depot. So if you're ever up in Leicester during the daytime, you can easily stop in there and get a cup of coffee and go through the station and take note of what it was like to have a station in those days. This was the work crew I was talking about out of Pennsylvania that built all of these stations. That's from a newspaper picture. It's the only thing I could find, so it's not the best quality, but it's better than nothing. And of course, as I mentioned, this is before it was converted into a coffee shop, but it's just nearly perfect. Still has the original scales, the old Freightmaster scales and weights and balances. Another shot that's from a different angle, and it's not the best shape, but it gives you an idea of the new station and the size of the warehouses. These warehouses, of course, I don't have the exact date, but after near about World War II and afterwards when the railroad went down, they, of course, no longer had use for them, so they tore them all down. But there is some people in town that are trying to build a layout, a railroad layout of Leicester's railroad highlights there. So that'll be interesting to see at some point. And just another shot of the warehouses and cars looking towards Main Street. That's the depot over here. And as you can see, the milk cans. Of course, milk was a big railroad produce market. They took and put on a special train that would come through every day and just make milk runs, pick up all the milk and deliver it to New York City. So before the days, of course, of good roads and dependable automobiles, the railroad was the biggest thing of importance to us in our lives. And as I said, it's amazing to think that these guys, you know, just 100 years or 50 years before, we're trying to scratch out wilderness here and start and build a farm and make some kind of living at it. And now they've got to the point where they can ship or receive products and produce and anything you can think of quickly even all over the world, because it only took a few hours to get it to Chicago or Buffalo or New York City and off it go. This weird looking contraption here is another railroad siding signal. Depending on which way it was turned, it would indicate if the switch was open or closed by a color, of course. Another hidden in tracks and weeds, a few 100 yards or so south of the Leicester station is an old grain bin. There's some talk of taking this down shortly, but they've been talking about it for years. But it, of course, is abandoned and somewhat of a hazard. But just an idea of what some of the old supporting structures were for the railroad and farmers. And then shortly down the road, you'll come across one of the original passageways for the railroad. Of course, anytime you get a train track and a road intersecting, you've got problems. So it's easier to take and raise them up, you know, put an underpass under the tracks and build up your stone bridges and avoid difficulties. So this is one of the old original, after improvements, it's about 100 years old railroad bridges still around. Now, of course, there's always going to be problems Lester in late 1940s, a little further down the road before they got to the river, had quite a freight train derailment there. Made a total mess of things. But again, no one was killed, and it was just a mess to clean up. And then, as I said, with the highway there, the Route 36 to Mount Morris became a busy roadway. So they built this big overpass and run the trains underneath it there. And it's funny in a way because right up here is one of them big old semis that was of course, the thing that killed off the railroads. They couldn't survive the competition with trucking. So as you come down into Mount Morris, of course, the DL&W ran behind the canning factory, right on down through. And it also intersected with the Pennsylvania Railroad that came up through the other side. Right there is the switch tower and the railroad track crossing. And of course, they did a world of business with the canning factory. And went on down in this direction and crossed the Jackson River down here. Just an idea, as I said, that picture wasn't really good to show you, but the Pennsylvania Railroad line come down and out of Cuylerville and followed what is the canal and now the Greenway Trail and went down to the river crossing. And the DL&W come down through Main Street, Leicester, in this way, and the switch tower and the crossing, and of course the size of the canning factory and Route 36. And here again, this is the bridge out behind the canning factory. Another one of the bridge improvements there, and sidings and such. And of course they're one-laners, you gotta be careful going through them. And they put a sign right on them, so it's clearance, 9 feet 10 inches. So you think, oh, that's pretty good, you don't have to worry too much.
Yeah, right.
But of course that guy didn't read
Whoops.
the sign.
Hate that when that happens.
He had a little trouble there.
You probably can
I
read.
don't know if he lost his job or not. He lost his truck and
His load.
Back in the 40s.
Yeah.
State trooper up here, he's getting a topside view of what are they going to do about it.
Figure it out.
Yep.
Hate that
Another
when
view
that
of
happens.
the, of course, there's the switch control tower at the X crossing.
Trooper up
Takes
there
a lot
making
of
sure
guys
he's
to
not
figure
taking
out
anything out of the
what to
truck.
do next.
Yeah.
Check it out. I don't see anybody doing anything.
You got quite a ways through.
We'll get to it.
Huh?
You got quite a ways through.
Yeah. Well, you figure that's just a dump truck. You know, it's going to cave in all four sides.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't a box truck.
Just another shot of the switch tower behind the canning factory and the number of tracks that all came together there and switched and some of the buildings, control towers and such. And we're leaving the canning factory now and the little switch tower. There was a little depot back here somewhere along the tracks for the canning factory, but I've never seen, it's on a map, but I've never seen any picture of it or have any clue of what
I've
it
seen
looked
the one
like.
down behind
or anything of that
Bosse's.
nature.
Yeah.
There's one down there. But
So
I've
now
never
we're
seen one.
leaving, last we'll get to the river bridges. And 4 bridges go across. This bridge down here is the DL&W bridge on into Mount Morris. And then, of course, that one back there is the Route 36 bridge. This one here is the Pennsylvania Railroad bridge. They just used the abutments for that to lay that Greenway bridge on it. So that's what that was. And this up here was the original covered bridge. That was a wooden covered bridge that went from Mount Morris and around and back and up to the Leicester. But it's in the process of being dismantled. There was a guy that purchased the bridge and the lumber, and he's tearing it all down. But, it used to be the 4 bridges on the river there. And we're coming into the Mount Morris station. A lot of people don't see it very easily because it's buried down in the woods, but the original bridge station for Mount Morris is intact. And still down there along the tracks. It's privately owned, but unfortunately they can't really do much of anything with it for a number of legal reasons and such, so it just sits there at the moment. But it's a wonderful station. This is an early picture of it, you know, with the water tower and the steam engine, all the landscaped lawns, and that was before the improvements to it in the turn of the century. And of course, this is in front of the Mount Morris station. There's the guys that built your railroads. These are the trainmen, trackmen. Most of them, of course, are immigrant Italian or Irish laborers. Those are the guys that went out and you know, in those days before machinery, when everything was done by hand, manual labor, they went out and for pennies a day worked their butts off to make a living for their families and keep the rails open. So they don't get any attention or gratitude, but they're the ones that did it for you. And back to the Mount Morris station, presently boarded up and just waiting for whatever happens next. I hope they can protect and preserve it, but we'll have to see. An old postcard view, of course, the old signals and stuff are still there. But by that time, the railroads no longer were in operation. And of course, now, main station Mount Morris is going to remount next now. Head on down the line, across the flag. I threw in here some, you guys like big massive engines. I don't know exactly where this picture is, but it's a DL&W engine, just to give you an idea of what groups they were. If you had to maintain one of those, you know, just thinking about all the piping on those things, all coal-fired boilers and such, and trying to keep them running there, that was a job labor intensive, as they say. So railroaders, of course, loved their engines and loved their jobs, but it wasn't easy by any means. Of course, we all know what happens to the railroad tracks in the spring thaws. That was always an issue and a problem. Rebuild the washouts and such, but kept everybody working, I guess. Now we're coming into the Groveland Station. On down the line, this was taken in the 1950s. This is one of the later diesels there. But anyways, as you can see, the switch towers and signals. But as you come into Groveland Station, there's this great big huge building down there, and you have to wonder what that was. My family lived in Groveland Station since 1920, and of course as a kid I used to run around down there, but I never saw that building. I never had a clue what it was. So we went for Groveland Station, and as you can see, it came down. This is Route 63. The tracks all came down to the lower side, and the depot was down here, and the businesses, and then made the crossing and headed on out towards Dansville. And of course, the spur line for the grain and feed mills. This is the Groveland Hotel here, and the Catholic Church. Those two structures, well, the Catholic Church is still there. And of course, they changed this. They put a road in here and came up around behind Groveland to the Scottsburg Road. So it kind of confuses things. But Groveland turned out to be a railroad town all to itself. in a massive operation. And that big building was a coal tower. And you can't imagine how huge that thing was.
It was probably one of the only existing ones that drove underneath it, where the main tracks were on drove.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, because you can see a number of main tracks. And the surprising thing is, I believe this to be the wooden one. It looks like the wooden one. Apparently at some time, I haven't been able to research it out and get the details, but it caught fire and burned to the ground eventually. That must have been quite a fire. And then they rebuilt one out of steel and concrete afterwards. But like I said, I don't know exactly the details. You can't read that probably from where you're at, but it had an elevating capacity of 150 tons of coal an hour, a storage capacity of 720 tons of coal, operated by steam, and you could coal up 2 engines or 2 trains at once on that. And as you can see, they used a lot of, the freight car, of course, was still mainly coal. They used a lot of freight cars and trains were still all coal. This is the old water tower and the Groveland repair shops, sheds. And Groveland 63 in the little village of Groveland, that's up here. And of course, there's more of the repair shops and such. I never, like I said, my family grew up there and I was there as a kid. And when I was there was hardly anything there. I never knew until I got, researching this and taking out photographs and such, postcards, what an extensive operation Groveland Station was for the railroad. I just can't imagine what it was like to see it in its big time. These are the repair shops, 3-bay repair shops, a couple different views. And of course, the coal tower in the background shows another of the earlier engines. There are railroads, of course, can give you an all-day lecture on what type of engine that is and details about it. I really don't know a thing about it
It's an
myself.
old 260.
There, see? Everybody will say, what's a 260? Well, it has to do with the wheel plate. And that's about the extent of my knowledge. So, the Lackawanna engine of early type. And of course, the nice shot of the trains going through the coal
He's got a
tower.
great
And,
collection of postcards.
like I said, the
I'm sure he does.
workshops
bet he
over here on
does.
the side.
I never realized Groveland was that extensive.
I didn't either. I never did. Not with all that.
Another
Like twice in the missed it.
The 484 Northern.
would be,
I don't know which number, it could be the 1500, it could be a 1600.
well, anyways, there's 2 of them there coming out of the shops.
One of each.
I don't know, those things, I don't know, there must be some around here in the museum locally. The only one I ever got sent to was down in the Smithsonian in Washington. And if you never stood up next to one of those things, and just to get an idea how unbelievably massive they are, it's an experience to think that, one guy would crawl up in there and send that thing down the road and control it. And those averaged the line to Buffalo, the DL&W line to Buffalo, from the Elmira to Buffalo was so nice and flat and level and well maintained. They used to call it the racetrack because they could they'd run them things about a mile a minute, about 60 miles an hour. And when you got that much power and momentum behind you, to keep it on a little narrow 2-inch track scares me to think about. I mean, these wheels alone, a lot of these wheels were almost 6 feet tall, just the wheels. And the length of the thing was, I think that says about 90 feet. So, it's an impressive piece of machinery, that's the Groveland control towers maintained all the yards and switches, and the nice thing about that was I was able to find something I've never seen, is an interior view of all the switch levers and controls, and a map of the layout of the rail yards, and how each, position of each lever is to open and close whatever switch, and how they kept track of them electronically and stuff. Trying to manipulate all of those different tracks and trains and movements in a day. You really had to have your, well, let's just say you had to be alert.
You know what? No cornfield meetings, do we?
Yeah.
Color postcard of the Groveland station. The Groveland station still survives, last I knew. It was privately owned and moved. The tower is gone.
Was the roundhouse that go down there?
Roundhouse, I believe, is destroyed. It's a great shot of a train crew at the Groveland station. Do not have identities for these guys. Fireman, engineer, brakeman, whatever. But every railroader, of course, had to have his uniform. And they love their jobs. You guys, I used to know some of those old railroaders, and that's all they ever lived for. That was their entire life, was their job. Maintain all those engines and keep things moving. This is a view of the backside of the Groveland Station businesses, and
Little town like that got all those tracks. Little town like that got all these tracks. Wow.
And the funny thing is, you get looking at this picture and you have to, okay, telephone poles. Well, what in the world is that little thing down there? You're trying to figure out that. I've never encountered anything of that type before. So I stumbled across the information, of course. That's the best part about research, you learn. So that was a mystery for a while. And of course, just past the stores was the grain buildings. They just tore those down not too long ago. One of the railroad cars are on a siding there, get loaded up, and another Model T, I guess it is. And nice color postcards. If it wasn't for postcards, we sure wouldn't have much to work with these days. And of course, Groveland Station, they never grew into a great big place.
Like
But
that
they
truck.
had their own businesses. As I said, the milk trains, they had the milk plant. That they, I remember as a kid that milk plant was in operation, and you could take in all day long. You'd hear the clanging milk cans, and they would steam clean them, and all the noise and steam and lines and lines of milk cans coming out of the conveyor belt there. And of course, one of the local farmers come down with his truckload of milk every day and drop it off at the plant and get it shipped off.
I know.
Now, back,
YMCA.
way back,
Wow, way back.
Civil War days, they had the Young Men's Christian Association, which was, before it became a gym sports-oriented organization. Their job was to take and maintain the Christian beliefs and morals of your average guy. Because we tend to stray now and then, for whatever reason. And a lot of these trains, of course, trained all across the country and railroads and such, and these trainmen and things all had layovers. They'd take a train wherever and had to do something with themselves until their next run back to a home base or a home station, whatever. So, in order to keep them out of trouble, the YMCA's took and collaborated with the railroads and developed railroad YMCA's. And all across the country, at railroad stations, they built YMCA buildings for these trainmen to stay in and be entertained with food and most of them I knew were either playing billiards or cards all day while they waited, but reading and that type of thing. Well, the DL&W built a YMCA in Groveland Station because of the huge, after 1900, the station became huge in railroad operations. And so on Main Street, they built the first YMCA. And this is where my story starts because my family, a century ago, immigrated from England, settled in Leicester. But when my grandfather got out of the army after World War I, he took up barbering. And the place to be where the business was Groveland Station. So he moved to Groveland Station and he bought this house right here on Main Street. And that's where my father was born, 1926. And next door to it, they built the railroad, Groveland YMCA building. Now, the YMCA building didn't last very long. The poor thing caught fire and burned to the ground soon afterwards. And by the time that Dansville's equipment got there, there wasn't much left to do. So shortly thereafter, they built another YMCA, which is this building here. And that was still there as I was growing up next to my grandparents' house. Unfortunately, we don't have any really good pictures of it. But this side over here was the apartments for the person that lived there and maintained the building. And it turns out that when my father got back from World War II in the Navy, went to school, graduated, and his first job was working for the DL&W, and he took over, right there, he took over running that Groveland YMCA. And that's the front view of it, the building. And these steps are still there. If you go through Groveland across from the firehouse, you can see these steps and the bank. But the building, of course, is long gone. Of course, my father is gone. But anyways, he worked there until about 1954, maybe, when the railroad decided to close the YMCA. And then they moved him, my family, down to Binghamton, where I was born in the 1950s. And from there, we moved on to Syracuse, and then ended up in Washington, D.C. when he retired from railroad and Amtrak work in the 1980s. And then we moved back up here to Livingston County. So that's my connection to railroads. That's why I spent my life around them. So anyways, here we are coming out of Groveland and across the train crossing the main road there. And there's that little building I was talking about. That's the strangest looking thing. And the big gates, of course, to try and protect the commuters and travelers from getting wiped out by these high-speed trains that were shooting through there constantly. And turns out that funny little building is the gateman's tower. And all those big gates are controlled by this guy in pneumatic or air controls. Make the gates go up and down. Now, I've had some pretty good jobs and I've had some pretty bad jobs in my life. But I can't imagine spending my days crawled up there in that little shed, watching trains and dropping gates all day. That drives me, I'd be jumping out of that place. He's got a little stove up there, probably a wood stove, you know, for heat, and he's got about enough space to turn around. And that's where his days were spent. But I thought that was the damnedest thing. I've never encountered anything like that before. And that's just a picture of one of them trains shooting by, and the gates there, of course. And Groveland's claim to fame in the 1940, I believe, One of those trains came shooting through there one day, and they took out a coal delivery truck and killed the 3 guys on the truck.
I know that one.
So they decided to, the railroads at that time decided it was time to do away with that. So if you guys remember on 63 there in Groveland, they had an underpass they built there. They put in a big fancy concrete roadway that would dip under the railroad tracks, and it was about, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, they, of course, no longer needed it, so they took and dug it all out and demolished it all. It's long gone. You'd never know it was ever there. And I don't, still haven't been able to find a decent picture of it, so I can't show you what it was like. You'll have to see if you can recall. Just another shot of one of them high-speed trains coming through Groveland. He's on the main line. He's not even, dealing with the station there. He's shooting right through. And of course, as I said, Groveland Station, they closed it up and sold it off at auction and took down the control tower, and by the time the Eagles came along, this was just before they burnt the control tower, or the pole tower down, and did away with that. Of course, the railroads were on their way out. There wasn't much left for them. And they abandoned these stations and a lot of the traffic, and they disappeared. That's the reason they had such a big operation in Groveland Station, was because they took in Dansville. They built their station up on the hill up there, and of course they had this. You see the difference between the mountain, if you want to call it such, and of course the village down here at Dansville. It was it's about an 8-mile trip, and for every mile it raised about 60 feet in elevation. So they needed those extra pusher trains out of Groveland to get the other trains, regular trains, on up the hillside into Dansville and on up into Wayland. And as you can see, the early steam, they just couldn't handle it like a diesel could. They didn't have the power and the traction to move such heavy weight and trains. And so they had to have the pushers until the more powerful